followed by confused creeper. Now this is a long story. The following story occurred in June of 2017. For some context, I live in a fairly major city bordering a great lake, and I pretty much live right on the coast. About 3 or so blocks inland off the lake, I live in a small one-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend of 5 years, Julia, and our 2 goofy-ass cats. We both work full-time, she makes chocolate, and, for now, I'm driving delivery. We spend our idle hours playing video games together, and making snacks in our cozy little window in the skyline. Neither of us earns much, but we do well enough to get by most of the time, and take each other on the occasional night out for drinks, dinner, movies, or all of the above. About 2 weeks before this story's events occurred, I had just lost a relatively high-paying job as a writer in a suburb of town. It was my first real job out of college. Anyways, on my first few days with no work to go to, I made a habit out of driving down to a nice spot on the lake. It was just a circular parking lot, nothing special, but it brought you close enough to the lake where you could see it without getting out of the car. It was just a tranquil place to hang out and spend some time sometimes. That day, I had gone there specifically to look at the lake and watch the James Comey hearings on my phone while occasionally switching to the Indeed app to send in some resumes. After I'd been there for about an hour, I decided it was probably time to head home. As I backed out of the circular parking lot, I felt a sudden, irrepressible urge to look behind me. When I did, I saw a light blue late model Hyundai pull in, and the driver was staring intensely at me. I looked away, assuming it was just an awkward moment, as these things usually are. When I looked again, he was still locked on me. I exited the parking lot, thinking he'd only just pulled in and was thus unlikely to immediately leave. I glanced into my rearview mirror as I drove away from the parking lot, and, just as I was about to turn a corner, I saw that light blue Hyundai pull out and follow in my direction. Again, I brushed it off. Certainly it's a coincidence, right? Maybe he got to the lot, and there were too many people for his liking there. What do I know, right? I decided that just to be safe, I would take a few odd turns on my way home to just ensure he isn't following me. There are 2 main roads in my town that are parallel to one another, with small residential streets bracing them. I took a path on these main roads and down side streets that nobody could have simply mimicked by chance. But after every turn, I would look back, and there he was. Right turn, look in the mirror, there he was. Left turn, take a look, there he is again. My heart flutters a little, but as I start to realize something may actually be going on here. Now, I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'11", 165 pounds, soaking wet. I'm not a pushover, and I'd be prepared to defend myself, but I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't avoid that outcome at all costs if I could help it. Bravado is a stupid reason to get killed. After he had followed me for far too long, I was totally fed up and decided to do something to decisively determine what the fuck was happening. I decided I'd pull into a gas station and a pump with a clear path in front of me. That way, he would have to follow me in there or fuck off. I was hoping for the latter option, but I had no such luck. I pulled up to the pump, leaving my car in drive just in case I had to peel out of there. He pulls in behind me and up to the adjacent pump. His windows were so tinted I couldn't see inside. He'd had them down at the parking lot when I saw him staring. I begrudgingly lowered my window and he did the same, revealing his old, sunken face. He couldn't have been too much older than around maybe 50 or 55 years old, somewhere between there. But this guy's face was sort of fucked up. I felt a primal negative reaction to him immediately. It was powerful, and it stifled me. Seconds later, I managed to find my voice. "Can I help you with something?" I half shouted. You think I didn't notice you following me? What do you want?" His face grows angry and red before he simply says, "No, you're not her." He speeds away, tires screeching. At this point, I'm even more confused than before. I'm angrier than before. I decided to call the police to report the incident. The dispatcher directed me to the park authorities. The officer asked if I'd be willing to meet him down at the parking lot where the incident began to give a statement. Of course I obliged. I drove directly there with new confidence. Even if the prick followed me back there, the cops are meeting me there, problem solved, I thought to myself. I pulled into the parking lot and picked a spot in direct line of sight to the entrance so that the officer could easily spot me when he arrived. I was flipping through my phone to kill time while I waited for the officer when I glanced up from my phone, and wouldn't you know it, that same light blue Hyundai was parked in the parking lot. I couldn't believe it. Still, I remained unafraid. He eventually did a circle around the lot and exited directly. It was as if he was just sweeping the area. Maybe he was looking for somebody. Finally, the officer showed up a few minutes later. I gave him the rundown of what had happened, and then told him he had just been in the lot 30 seconds ago. 30 seconds later, the motherfucker pulls in the lot again. I point the car out to the officer and impulsively shout, "That's him, that's him!" Before I remember who I was talking to, the officer gave me a look of surprise and flagged the car down and directed it to pull into a parking spot and to turn the car off. He spent about 10 minutes talking to the guy. When he walked back over, he informed me that the man had said that I was doing something creepy, and he wanted to make sure I wasn't going to hurt anybody. I have to admit to chuckling a little bit at the accusation. The officer reassured me, though. They knew of this guy, but he didn't say what for. All he said was that the man was shaking and asking to apologize. By the time the officer escorted him home, the man was told that he was not welcome back in the park due to his past behavior and him following me all over town that night. I felt justice was applied and drove home happily, albeit indirectly. That night, my girlfriend and I were sitting on our third-story balcony smoking cigarettes and sipping on beers around 2 a.m. We were just talking and enjoying being home together. With no chores or obligations on our backs, the stress of my unemployment was momentarily dulled to a whisper in the back of my mind. But then we saw it. The light blue Hyundai, or at least what I thought was the light blue Hyundai, was idling on the street. It was 2 houses down from our apartment building, and we were certainly visible. Of course, I'd already told Julia about what happened that day in detail, so when I put my finger to my lips and subtly gestured towards the idling car in the street, she understood exactly what was happening. "I think that's the same car," I said. "I can't be certain, but it's definitely the same make and model." It was too dark to make out the exact color. The shade of light blue could have easily been confused with white at nighttime. I had written his license plate number in the notes in my phone and squinted to try to make the plate out from a distance. I could tell that the first 2 digits and the last matched, and that was enough for me. I called the police and explained the entire situation. As I'm talking to the dispatcher, the car slowly pulls away. The dispatcher tells me that there are officers nearby, and they will come inspect the area. I tell her that the car pulled off, but she reassured me that there were units very nearby and they would look for him. They never found the car, and I triple-checked my locks that night. Nothing else abnormal occurred. After a few weeks had passed, Julia and I had all but forgotten about that odd and somewhat scary encounter. We both had a sweet tooth late one night and decided to just hit the gas station on the corner for some crappy snacks and Gatorade. I needed gas anyways. Julia drove to the station, and I went into the store to get the goodies. As I was walking out of the store towards Julia in the car, I look over, and that ugly fucking blue Hyundai is pulled up, and the man is staring Julia down. I stared directly at him, and he meets my gaze. I just stared and stared and stared. I wanted him to know I saw him. I get to the car quickly and curl Julia inside. I locked the doors and explained what was going on. We're both pretty freaked out at this point, but doing our best to stay composed. We pull out and drive randomly under the assumption we're being followed. We dial the cops again and they send out more cars to look. Nothing came of it, and we haven't seen the guy since. Now, the only information we learned was that the park rangers knew him because he had been caught following women around the trails of the park, particularly women with headphones on, who were walking or jogging alone, something my girlfriend likes to do. His debacle with me was the last straw, and that is why he was banned from the park. My impression is that he had seen Julia driving my car around town, as she often does, and saw what he liked. Having associated her with the car, it would explain why he followed me, hoping it was her. It's impossible to be sure, I guess. The police told us they would keep us posted if anything came of it, but just told us to call if we see him near us again. So, creepy guy who was probably stalking my girlfriend but stalked me instead? Let's not meet. Crazy kid who wouldn't go away. This happened in early 2017. I don't have too many friends, so I take any chance I can to befriend someone else. This particular guy, who we'll call Danny, started off as a pretty cool guy. We would talk about our personal lives, play basketball, and help each other out with homework. However, things began to get creepy when I gave him my number and showed him where I lived, because he began coming over every single day. I eventually got fed up with it, and one day told him that he couldn't come over, but he showed up to my house anyways. When I told him that he had to leave, he came into my house and went right down into my basement. Even when my mom helped me out by saying that we were gonna leave in a few minutes, he still wouldn't leave. This went on for 10 more minutes until he finally decided to leave. Now this is when things get extra creepy. One Saturday he called, begging me to let him in my house. I told him, dude, you're coming over too much, my mom's getting fed up. He then told me that he had to, and that he was locked out of his own house. I didn't believe him and hung up. Not long after that, my phone said I was getting a call from another friend. I picked up and was surprised to hear Danny on the other line. The bastard went to another friend's house to call me, because he knew I wouldn't pick up if I saw it was him. He started begging again, and I lied and told him that neither I nor my parents were home, and that he wouldn't be able to come in. But he just yelled on the other end, "I'm going to your house right now!" At this point, I was shaking and made sure to lock the doors. He didn't think we were home. Why would he come here? When I heard a knock on the door, I looked out my window to see if it was him. And when I saw that it was, I made sure not to make any loud sounds. I think I even heard him try and open the door himself. After the knocking had stopped, I looked out my window to see if he was still there, and was trying to see that he was walking around my backyard. I didn't leave my house for a while that day, because I didn't see him leave, and was afraid that he was camping out in my shed. The next day I got a few messages from my other friends, telling me that Danny kept trying to get inside their houses too, and one of them even said that he tried getting $10 from them for bike parts. For the next week, we all felt really uncomfortable, thinking that he would keep coming back and camping out in our yards, thinking that no one was home. Some of our parents were thinking about calling the cops on him. We never spoke to Danny after this, and after the semester had ended, he kind of disappeared. He still has my number and address though, and who knows if he'll show up again. A cop when you actually need one. So this happened earlier this year. As a little background, I'm a 30-year-old male, married, 29 at the time, with a young daughter. I live in a rural Northern California town, pretty much in the center of the gold rush. And I don't know if it's all the way the land was taken or the way people killed for wealth back then, but it's always seemed to have a higher share of strange recluses and sovereign citizen types. That being said, this is not a haunting ghost story, or a strange people of the woods story, but it was by far the most frightening encounter I've ever experienced as a father. Some time ago, I ended up with an extra day off, and my wife and I decided to go for a drive and check out a semi-local gun show. Now from time to time, I'll get tables at them and have friends who do them regularly, so we went to visit, as I'm always looking for obscure parts and pieces for old military weapons, and had some family that lived in the area of this show too. We had a hell of a winter last year, so unsurprisingly, it was a cold, gloomy day. We drove about an hour and knew the promoters, so walked right in. As I was passing the tables in search of the right stuff, I was carrying my daughter with me. She was very small and ridiculously cute, so everyone wanted to look and ask about her, which is normal from what I've observed for parents. At times, you even draw a small crowd, usually a sweet lulls. Old meaning little old ladies, and some grandpa types too. As a side note, I had one grumpy lady tell me she was way too young. I looked at her confused and said she's like 3 months old. She'll never remember. Now back on topic, there was one man who seemed a bit more excited than most men his age, but he said that he had worked at an EMT and in an ICU for years, so seemed reasonable that he was so happy to see healthy babies. As the afternoon went on, he passed me a few more times, moving against the crowd, and commented on how beautiful she was, as babies often do at that age. My wife soon needed to breastfeed our daughter. We went out to the car and had blinders in the back seat so she could have privacy and keep the baby from distractions. I turned on the heater, locked the doors, and went back in to help a buddy sell during a busy appointment. About 10 to 15 minutes later, my phone starts ringing, with my frantic wife on the other end. About 3 minutes before, I had noticed that law enforcement had gone up and walked outside of the show. It took a minute to calm her down, but apparently the guy had followed us outside and been watching closely. My wife got the sudden feeling that feeling that makes your hair stand up while feeding in the car? That was when she saw a shadow standing outside her door, blocking it from opening, holding a small metal tube, mag light. At that same moment, a sheriff pulled up, who had also seen us go to the car. The officer asked what was going on, and the man tried to say that he was talking to my wife, who rolled the window down slightly and said she was not, and didn't want to either. The officer asked his name, and when he turned around, he gave the name and immediately ran away. Name was a fake. Detained, he gave his real name, and within 1 minute of calling it in, the man was turned around and arrested. Turned out he had felony warrants for kidnappings. The man was waiting for the nearby cars to leave. He was about to try and take my wife and infant daughter. Had that cop not been there, who knows how it would have unfolded. Luckily, there was a cop when we needed one. Driving at 2 a.m. January this year. I was dropping off my boyfriend at his house, since I picked him up earlier, and he didn't have any means to return. I am a 24-year-old female, and it was already well over 2 a.m. I drop him off and start driving home. It takes me 5 minutes to get back, so it is uneventful and quick, or at least it usually was. As I was driving on the empty streets, not a single car was out. Most people were still on vacation, and it was still like January 2nd. People still party hard, I guess. And I drove out onto the avenue nearby my boyfriend's place when I saw her. A girl, about 20 or so years old, slightly chubby build, nothing special about her attire, running down the street. I slowed down to an almost full stop and kept looking at her through my mirrors, and she had a terrified look on her face. Behind her was a dude, tall, kind of bulky, and drunk out of his mind, running after her. I remember all these stories I've read here, and I took a quick glance around. No cars, nobody else on the streets. So I took my chance, got in reverse, and got close to her, opened my passenger window, and asked quickly, "Are you in trouble?" To which she replied, "Yeah, he won't stop following me." I unlocked the door and got her in, just in time. I got her window up before she even closed the door, so we both jumped when the man suddenly slammed his palms on it and stared at us through it. I just stepped on it and left. I'm a terrible driver in the sense that I get lost pretty easily, but I still asked her where she lived, and I took her there. She thanked me the whole way, and she explained the situation. She left a friend's party on foot, looking for any passing cabs, no battery on her cell phone, and this guy from around the neighborhood just decided he needed to get at her. She had told him she was fine and didn't need any help, but the guy wouldn't talk much and still follow her at a quick pace, so she started to run, and evidently he did as well. She did not know this man, and it was more than plainly obvious that he was shit drunk and kinda enraged. So, even if it wasn't rape, she could have gotten beaten up or stabbed or something. He just didn't look right. So she got home safely, thanks to me. She thanked me a lot, and I kinda scolded her and told her to never do that again. and to take better care of herself, call cabs or ask a friend to wait with her, or call a parent or relative to pick her up. So yeah, crazy drunk people that roam the streets at 2 a.m., stop meeting with nice people. 'Cause even if you try, if I'm there, I'll fucking stop you. Thought my boyfriend got home from work. It wasn't my boyfriend. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we got into a pretty big fight about something stupid. Now, I can't even remember what it was about. But it was one of those fights where you really don't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So this afternoon, I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he'd surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come inside and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed, and I had the earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight, and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed it was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight, and didn't think about it. I was just lying there waiting for him to finally come inside. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting for 24 hours, huh?" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with a red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom, his sister, the landlady? For some reason, I concluded that surely it was his mom or his sister. So I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sister don't have keys, and I've never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There was a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up and I asked him if his mom or his sister might have come unannounced. He told me, "No, don't move, I'm calling the police." The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird, though. Nothing was missing from the apartment, despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. So for a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have to tell you something, but don't freak out." He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months, and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment, but doesn't touch or take anything valuable, not even the money jar, sitting right at the entrance, takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and leaves immediately. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day. I hope I never do. Bad things would have happened to her. This happened last night at work, and frightened me enough that I thought I'd post it. I saved a little girl from being kidnapped, which honestly surprises me. This man was big and crazy looking, and I'm a small 20-year-old woman who looks very unmenacing. This family came in, a husband and wife, a baby and a girl around 6 or 7 years old, I guess. They got their food and sat down to eat. After I ran them out, I went to the back to do some dishes. I came back to the dining room and the dad was throwing away their trash, while the mom was getting the baby out of the high chair and this little girl was just running around. Then, suddenly, this guy comes up behind her, grabs her hand, and they start walking towards the door. I'm the only one in there who sees this happening at all. So in my head, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh shit. I catch these people at the door and bend down and tell this girl, and tell her that she forgot to pick out the cookie that comes with her kid's meal. And if her dad let her come with me, I'll help her out. I looked the man in the eyes and could tell he knew I knew what was going on. The girl took my hand, and the man bolted out of the door, never to be seen again. So she got a free cookie and didn't get taken away from her family. So, kidnap her with the balls to try and actually take a little girl while her family is sitting 3 booths behind you. Let's not meet again, okay? Crazy lady hates teenagers. Ma'am, I'm 20. I live in a small town and work in a neighboring town. I got off work last night around 10:30 and was feeling pretty okay because I didn't have to work Easter. I was planning to go to Walmart, but wanted to get gas from a closer gas station because I had their rewards cards. Now, living in a small town, there's not much to do around here, especially if you're between the ages of 15 and 20. So going back at least 3 generations, the teens in this town, which I always call my hometown, spend their Friday and Saturday nights driving around AutoZone, down 3rd Street about 5 blocks, turning onto South Main, driving 2 blocks, turning around in the pawn shop, and driving back the way they came. I know, boring, but it's all there really is to do that isn't illegal. So I went inside and paid for my gas, and noticed a woman standing in the corner glaring out the front of the gas station. I didn't think much about it, so I just headed back outside. The night was nice, so the drag was still filled with a few cars, and the AutoZone across the street was still filled with parked cars of people around my age or a bit younger. There was also a pickup filled with high school boys in the pump across from me who were minding their own business, getting gas and snacks. Suddenly, my chill mood is interrupted by the same angry woman who was in the store. She starts screaming in my face. I'm sure she got some of her spit on my face. Get your fucking ass home! I'm tired of you fucking kids driving around at night. Get the fuck out of here! She screams, loud enough for the rowdy guys in the pickup next to me to go quiet. Oh, and she said I need to stop having sex and being a slut. I'm a virgin. She keeps yelling about teenagers and how disrespectful we are. And since I'd just gone off work, I was sort of brain dead and blanked out until I heard my gas pump tick off, and the lady was still screaming in my face. $13 of gas later. She had worked herself into a sweat and was breathing heavily, and as a somewhat overweight person myself, I can tell she was having a very hard time at it, thanks to her size. My mouth just dropped open, and I pulled the pump out of my tank. I mustered up the only response I could think of. Ma'am, I'm 20. I just got off work. I'm getting gas. Somehow this crazy bitch gets angrier and tried to step forward, and she's already too close. When the boys in the pickup start laughing, "Hey lady, I'm 17, the driver yells. Then the 4 other boys now out of the truck got into the act, yelling their ages. Crazy lady now having multiple underage targets, goes chasing them. The boys are screaming and laughing at this 60-year-old lady as she chases them around the truck. I thought, fuck this, and climbed into my truck. The driver of the truck, the only one who was in the truck, looks at me and is now like, now what? So I motion for him to move. He honks and yells for his friends to jump into the bed. 3 of them made it in, except for the bigger kid, who I think said he was 16 years old. The old lady grabbed his shirt and wasn't letting go. I had started to drive away, but stopped when I heard that 16-year-old yelling for her to let him go, while the other guys told her to fuck off. She started to claw his arm with one hand and trying to push him to the ground with the other hand. Out of all the times the cops not to be driving around, this was the time. I climbed out of my truck mumbling to myself, no, thinking I was going to have to save a kid who wasn't exactly too much younger than me from being killed by a crazy bitch. Thank God for the group of people across the street, because they noticed and started laughing and screaming at the crazy lady. She lets go of the 16-year-old and starts hobbling to the curb. The 16-year-old starts to scramble, and I, already being tall, built, and filled with adrenaline, check him quickly before throwing him into the cab with the drivers and tell him to leave now in my best mom voice. The driver nods, and the other boys are still screaming about the crazy bitch, while the 16-year-old just nodded and tried to hold back tears. He peels off and is gone. I climbed into my pickup because I see that crazy lady is coming back, and I started up and drive around her, telling her to go fuck herself. I decided to go on the drag, mostly despite this crazy bitch. I drove off and went on the drag 2 times, and seen crazy lady on the corner of the gas station with her arms crossed, flipping off every teenager who passed by. I go by the 3rd time and she's gone. I'm wondering if she went home or worse, went to one of the parking lots where people parked to harass some more other people. It was the latter. There she was, in the AutoZone parking lot, screaming at some girl before a guy got in between them. I stopped and watched, and was happy to see that they seemed to be handling it, and by handling it, I mean harassing her back. There was a guy who had repurposed a scooter cart and kept doing circles around her. I drove off, and when it was getting late and time for curfew, I pulled over and talked to the group and guy on scooter, and apparently she had enough and just trudged into the darkness behind the gas station. I pointed out that the houses behind the store are known for meth heads, and the group agreed she was probably on something. I ended up hanging out with them the rest of the night. Pretty chill people. Guy on the scooter was hilarious. I never seen those guys in the truck again that night. I just hope that 16-year-old kid wasn't too scared.